When you look at renewables across the board, it's pretty fair to say that rare earths are a component in all of the more efficient forms. So basic solar, thin film solar doesn't use rare earths, but if you go to the super high efficiency solar, it does. Maybe you don't have solar panels on your roof and maybe you don't have a wind turbine, but if you're driving a car manufactured anytime after 2000, you probably are driving a car with dozens of rare earth components. They're ubiquitous. They're in everything that we touch and everything we use. A lot of people want to directly mine rare earths, and they go out and they claim to find a rare earth deposit. And the most recent example is the Mountain Pass mine in California. They selected that ore deposit because of its lack of thorium. You can never compete against China by trying to avoid thorium because you'll always end up with the lowest value rare earths. You'll never have the suite of high value rare earths. Either uranium or thorium or any combination is source material. Source material being nuclear fuel. Now that same nuclear fuel could then be used to make energy or make weapons. In 1980, cooperation between Russia and the United States, the NRC, the IAEA, of course, want to control for source material better. Let's go with 0.05%. You know, you don't want anybody having concentrations higher than that. I mean, it wouldn't even make sense. Why would you let people do that? But when you went into the microcosm of the rare earth industry, the entire rare earth industry's primary mineral feedstock was mineralogically tied to thorium and sometimes uranium. So the primary feedstocks of rare earth were instantly labeled source material. And so the people that used to mine something like titanium or zirconium used to sell this byproduct, this co-product, into the market, and that's what carried the entire rare earth industry. Well, one day they woke up, somebody read the regulations and said, holy shit, this is source material. If anybody finds out we've been dealing in source material for the last 30 years, this is a serious problem. So what they did was they never complained. They didn't alert anyone. They didn't go back to Congress and say, hey, the IAEA, we know they had good intentions, but do you realize this is the feedstock? Instead, they quietly just diverted the resource back into the ground or into tailings lakes, never said a word. So the larger industry that used to take those resources and make them into useful things like oxides and magnets and metals and alloys, a lot of these got closed down or sold off. Well, the Chinese government was throwing cash around saying, go out, buy these technologies, bring the know-how into our country. We want to rule the world with rare earths. If you look at the global economy, rare earths are critical inputs to over $7 trillion in value-added goods. So every year, $7 trillion worth of manufacturing that used to be spread all over the world, it is now highly concentrated in China. These are high value-added goods, right? The most expensive things that have the highest margins. The employees were well-paid employees, so it's not like you lost another hat factory in Tennessee. No, you're losing the company that should have been making these things in the United States.
I wish you all knew the extent of the sacrifices that Jim makes. Very moving and humbling for me. Nobody knows better than me how frustrating it is, and I'm sure you're going to relate some of that for us, but thanks, man.
Let's look at some of the bills that are up in Congress, and it's a lot to read there, but basically that bill says that the government is going to change all of the rules on federal lands, and that the people that administer the regulations relative to federal lands are going to strip the rights away of the public, and these guys can run roughshod through federal lands and mine willy-nilly, and if somebody has a legitimate lawsuit, a legitimate claim, this law strips them of their right to actually complain or get redress. Here's the 113th, 112th, 111th, basically the same thing. All the bills above reduce or eliminate environmental and public protections to stimulate new resource production. But as you guys should know by now, we don't need new resource production. We're throwing away basically 100% of global demand. If you looked at every single mining entity in the US alone, if you looked at uranium mines, you looked at phosphate mines, you looked at mineral sands mines, you look at iron ore mines, you could meet 100% of global demand. A recent report out by the USGS, they looked at just one industry, just the phosphate industry, disposes of 65% of global rare earth demand every single year. And why do they throw away valuable resources? Well, simple. They don't want to be labeled a producer of source material. So anybody talking about resources is out of their mind. It's not a resource issue. And even if you get the resources, the next issue is you need the value chain. So would you really want to be the Indonesia of rare earth resources, chopping down your trees and shipping them off someplace so somebody else can make furniture? No, you need the value chain. So this is the issue. We need a value chain. Anyway, there were some other bills that had really good ideas like, let's find alternatives to elements on the periodic table. I don't know. Unobtainium thing, yeah. When Congress needs something done, they look out to industry, and industry comes through and tells them their story. And Washington, D.C. is, they evaluate things, and in the end, industry suggests regulatory changes, and that's how it happens. The problem today is that the first group of people they're looking to are these junior mining companies, these wannabe rare earth companies, these struggling, near bankrupt rare earth companies. And they all tell Washington, D.C. the exact same story. Oh, it's the regulations. Oh, if you could just get rid of the EPA, we could mine this stuff. We could solve all these problems. And that's what's going on. They're telling Congress it's a resource issue, and the only way to solve the problem is to reduce and minimize regulations so that these guys can just get a pick and shovel and go dig in anybody's backyard. It's not like Congress is completely inept. They go to the experts. They go to the National Association of Miners, right? So the National Mining Association goes, yeah, let's get rid of regulations. So what they're hearing from industry is it's a regulatory problem, and that's why we can't bring the resource online. If you want to look at this from a strictly environmental standpoint, all of these rare earth resources that are currently being dumped into the environment, into government-sanctioned storage facilities, a pond, would no longer be dumped into the environment. They would be worth money, and they would be diverted into a technology economy in the United States. In Congress, the most popular approach is the elimination or reduction of laws and protections for the environment and people. That's the top-selling storyline in Washington, D.C. these days. And if you look at maybe the 12.5 bills, every single one of them approaches the problem that way. We take the opposite approach. We don't think you need to change any mining regulations at all. You don't need to open any new mines because all of the world's rare earths are already being produced here in the United States. They're actually being dumped into the environment with actinides, with radioactive material. So we'd like to actually see it all be done better and cleaner. The private sector raises $6 billion. And they open up rare earth mines that are now essentially bankrupt. And these rare earth mines go out and dig the hole and take that low value commodity and they upgrade it to some level, and then ultimately it all gets shipped to China to be turned into something actually useful for industry. This is the economic rare earths that are needed if you want to be part of any modern economy. This is what's being mined today by Western companies trying to avoid thorium. There is a disparity. I hope you can see that. And so when all of these guys are talking to members of Congress and the Defense Department saying, it's a resource issue, just shut down the EPA, they're not even talking about solving the problem. The problem is the value chain. Because anybody who opens a rare earth mine today is going to be shipping the low-value purified powders to China to get upgraded into something useful. We see the rare earth problem is so fantastically large that no single corporation could ever solve it. And just short of a government Manhattan-style solution, even the government can't solve this problem. And our government's broke, and all of our allied partners are broke. So we said, God, how do we solve problems like that back in the old days? Well, we worked together, right? We all threw in together. So we proposed a cooperative, and the cooperative is designed to be multinational, so we can go to our friends in Japan and Korea and the EU, and the guys who need, Siemens, who needs neodymium dysprosium magnets desperately, could say, hey, we want to put up part of the capital for this. And the guys over at Toshiba can do the same thing, and the guys at GE and Westinghouse, and governments can also throw money in. And so the end users would own this cooperative, and they'd be guaranteed product coming out the other side. No need to spend money opening up a mine, no need to neuter the entire regulatory structure of the EPA. The stuff's there. It's basically available in large quantities. But what we need is the value chain. If you looked at all of the rare earths we're throwing away every single year that are very easy to recover, proven recovery, and it's very low cost, you would also end up with a co-product of thorium. And very conservatively, you're going to get about 10,000 tons a year of thorium. And if anybody actually understands what that means in the real world, that's basically all the energy you need globally. So you could power the globe from the waste product of a byproduct of some other mine commodity. Well, what does it do for the thorium, the people more interested in thorium? Well, it does the same thing. It creates a private corporation that can accept funding from allied governments, NATO members, that's very important, and the consumers and users of energy. Anybody who had IP, anybody who could come to the table and say, hey, we've got part of this solution, could come into the corporation and get equity in exchange. And this would be just a massive multinational investment platform. Another thing that this does besides solve the finance problem is it solves the regulatory issue, and it does it in an interesting way. Because it's multinational, the entity, when it actually goes to fuel and test the reactor, can essentially put out feelers to every single government that has host that's invested or has folks that have invested. And it can look for the most hospitable regulatory environment. So it doesn't have to operate under the NRC. It could go to Canada. It could go to South Africa. It could go to Belize. Who cares? And the point is, you need to get the reactor operating. You need to demonstrate the reactor safety to the world so that you force the NRC and any other regulatory entity that is pushing back on you to accept and acknowledge the safety of the reactor. I know a lot of you guys think that the NRC is in the business of keeping us safe, but the NRC is just like any other regulatory agency. Part of its mission, most of its mission, is to keep that industry safe. And so that's why you get pushback. That's why when you ask the NRC, what are we doing on liquid fuels, they say, oh yeah, we're working on it. We'll have those in 30 years. Right? Their job is to protect the existing industry. The way to get around that is to get this thing up and running and demonstrate its safety for the world to see and force the NRC and all of the other regulatory agencies to acknowledge it. And what's really nice is because this is a federal charter issued by the United States government, it has the implied support of the US. So you're basically saying, yeah, the NRC's on board, they just don't know it yet. So how do we get everybody to throw money in? right? How do we get the entire world to throw enough money in behind a single project to get it up and going? How do we create a Manhattan Project global cooperative? Well, in my eyes, it's pretty simple. When you can shake these people hard enough and make them understand what the risks are, they will take action. So what we do, what John and I have done with the Department of Defense over and over again, is stress the causal risk that we're staring in the face. And that is that China has publicly stated over and over again in newspapers, it's not like they have a secret committee, right? No, they actually publish this in English language newspapers, that they're going to control the commercial development of this and its global deployment. They're going to own it all. And so when we talk to folks that are associated with the Defense Department and NATO, we say to them, look, 70, 80% of your assets are deployed around energy, right? What happens when somebody comes along with an alternative, safer, cleaner, better source of energy? All of your aircraft carriers have no purpose. They've been unpurposed. You're protecting pipelines for a fossil fuel for an age that should have passed a long time ago. So when we convince governments of the risks and the importance of this, we believe we can get them to move, and we believe we can get the money and the resources to get this done quickly. So back to the loony bin, which is Washington, D.C. So they think everything is going to be solved by the free markets. But what I say is, if you look at the last 30 years of U.S. industrial history, the only person that won from the free markets is China. All of our assets, all of our IP, all of our manufacturing, all of our jobs, our tax base, it's now in China. So no, I don't know what they smoke there, but I know it's legal in Colorado and a couple other places. But what makes anybody think that the free markets are suddenly, just once in the last 30 years, going to do something that helps the United States or our Western partners? The last 30 years, everything has been shipped to China, and China, strangely enough, employs something they call free markets, and it's the free market system that the United States operated on for the first 200 years. Before Milton Friedman came along and redefined free markets as something else, that's how the United States built the highway system, built the aviation industry, that's how it supported the auto industry, and then suddenly we rejected all of that and lost everything, but it's exactly what China's doing. Now a lot of people like to say, oh, China's playing unfair, they don't play by the rules, nanny nanny doo-doo. No, they're playing by the rules that we played by, and all of the Europeans post-World War II were bitching about us because we did to Europe what China's doing to us. Just look at what they did with rare earths, okay? Just think about what they did with a tiny, microscopic, insignificant industry. The entire rare earth industry, from mining to purified powders, is only worth $4 billion. What's $4 billion to a government, right? Bill Gates watches MSNBC, and when the stock price moves a little bit, it's plus 4 billion, minus 4 billion. It's nothing. It's nothing. They took a $4 billion industry, and they now directly and indirectly control over $7 trillion worth of value-added goods. They could stop every single automobile assembly line in the world, because every automobile in the world now has rare earth components. That's the power they have. With the itty-bitty $4 billion tiny nothing industry, what are they going to do when they control energy? So, question. Are financial markets suddenly one day, tomorrow, going to wake up and go, hey, this thing's been sitting around for 40 years, let's invest in it? Nope, it's not happening. People are making progress, that's good, but there's a larger problem, which is China's funding this thing at the highest levels. So another question we need to ask ourselves in the world of free markets and competition, do we really think we're going to build a cheaper reactor than China? Next question, who wants a cheaper reactor? Seriously, think about that. So why does it matter? Because energy is the single largest component of global GDP. Nothing is bigger. Nothing comes close to it. And almost everything springs from energy. The paper can't be made without energy. The lights here, you know, you write code for Silicon Valley. Everything springs from energy. So based on 30 years of one-way, unidirectional transfer of technologies and IP, who really thinks the free market is going to solve this problem and do it in a contest with the Chinese government from the highest levels all the way down, saying that they're going to do this and they're going to own this? Here's the history of what we've done. In the 111th and 112th Congress, we actually got our language inserted into bills. Lobbyists for foreign governments and foreign corporations had that language reduced to a study, which means nothing. In the next Congress, the 113th Congress, it was offered as an amendment on the one single year in 50 years of history where there were no amendments allowed. So that was a tough year for John and I. Probably some of you guys remember how pissed off I was. And the next year, the next Congress, we had a standalone legislation in the House and the Senate. And once again, practically nothing happened that year. 2015, this is interesting. 2015, John and I really had to concentrate our limited resources on one single best possible play. And every bit of our resources were focused on the House NDAA, which is the defense bill that gets passed every year no matter what. We successfully met with folks in the Department of Defense, the Pentagon level. We got sign-off from everybody. We had at least three members of Congress who were members of the Armed Services Committee go to the chairman and say, please include this legislation to solve this national security problem. Well, that was seriously considered and it was going to happen. And then they took our little bill, the one that has its little hat on and it dances through Congress, and they sent it over to CBO, Congressional Budget Office, and CBO said, oh my God, this thing may cost something. We don't know how much, but it may cost some amount of money. Now, in the bill, we don't ask for money. In the bill, we promise to repay any government entity that had to spend any money to administer this thing and get it done. So we even promise to pay back any trifling amount of money that may be spent. It was rejected for lack of funding for unknown administrative costs. Now, every single other bill going through Congress has administrative costs. But ours was somehow singled out, it may possibly cost something. So that was pretty disappointing, needless to say, and so disappointing, in fact, that I didn't even put this slideshow together until the day before, because I'm just very upset about it. But the upside is we actually have people in the Senate looking at it because they're still working on the defense bill, and we have a potential sponsor inside the DoD who may be willing to say to the Senate, look, it's administrative costs, we'll cover it. Typically, Congress produces about 3,000 bills a year, and of those, roughly 300 pass. But if you look at recent history, here John and I are running around with like your generous funding, which isn't very much compared to Exxon or BP, and we're trying to get somebody to pass a law, and it's very, very difficult. So everybody here in TV land needs to reach out to your member of Congress, your senator, and explain to them that the United States is 100% reliant on China for all of these value-added materials, and that our military And our allies, NATO partners, all of them are 100% dependent on China for these value-added materials. And worse than that, their careers, their children's careers, are ultimately dependent on whether the United States has a presence in the technology economy. And we have no place if we are not competitive there. So we have to get back into this field. We have to make it happen. We have to be a player. We can't take off our uniform and walk off the field. We have to be a player. Our approach is big tent, multi-government, multinational, and if we lose this race, we've lost everything.